left Moses and the Hebrews that would become the nation of Israel, they had come up to the Red Sea. The army of Egypt was behind them, mountains to the right, desert to the left, nowhere else to go. And God says, you go forward. And all of a sudden, as they're beginning to move in faith, most of us kind of know the story. God does a miraculous thing, and the water stands up on the right, and the water stands up on the left, and they begin to walk through on dry land. And I looked at a couple of movies. I've seen a bunch of different things, and I don't know if anything can actually depict what a huge effort this was. Most likely between 1.5 and 2 million people. This is with older people and adults and kids are all going to go through the Red Sea. Use the imagination in your mind. We've kind of given a little bit of help here, but imagine people walking through here and they are trusting in God. They're trusting in Moses, but they're looking to their right and they're seeing water stand up and there's fish and stuff in the water. And you absolutely know some middle school boy stuck his hand in the water. I mean, there's no way. I just try to take a panoramic view. I just try to put myself in the story sometimes. There's no way they go through without some kids putting their hand in the water, flicking the water, seeing everything. They're amazed. They're frightened. But have you ever seen like a 4 or 5, 6-year-old boy or girl? Are they really afraid? They're not afraid of anything. They're running and laughing. This is complete chaos going through the Red Sea. And as they move through, finally the end of the line comes and they are getting ready to come out of the Red Sea. And they turn around and they see their worst nightmare. They see the Egyptian army coming behind them. They have witnessed, remember this, they've witnessed this miraculous event, but yet in real life, in real time, they are still looking behind them. They're still wondering what is going to happen if we get to the other side and the Egyptians get to the other side. They've got their horses and the chariots and their soldiers. They're coming after us. So I want you to get that whole visual, not just a few people. Let's just say 1.5 million people, families, all of their cattle, their luggage. Remember, God gave them some things they could sell later, so they got gold and silver. Everything they own is coming through the Red Sea. You have the visual. And at some point, they come up out of the Red Sea. When they turn back around, all they see are the chariots and the horses and everyone coming after them. We pick up the story now. We're on the other side in our story. Exodus chapter 14, verse 26 and following. Then the Lord said to Moses, stretch out your hand over the sea so that the water may come back on the Egyptians, on their chariots and horsemen. So Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and at daybreak the sea returned to its normal depth. While the Egyptians were trying to escape from it, the Lord threw them into the sea. The water came back and covered the chariots and the horsemen, plus the entire army of Pharaoh that had gone after them into the sea. Not even one of them survived. But the Israelites had walked through the sea on dry ground. And the waters like a wall to them on their right and to their left. That day the Lord saved Israel from the power of the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore. What's happening? They're turning around, the water has come back, and dead bodies are floating. Dead bodies are coming onto the edge of the sea. When Israel saw the great power that the Lord used against the Egyptians, the people feared the Lord and believed in him and his servant Moses. I want to pause just for a second because many of us maybe know the story because of movies. A few of us grew up in church hearing like Sunday school stories and Bible stories. We probably don't get the full panoramic view of what's happening. For some of us today, maybe the most important thing you will hear is this. There is one all-powerful God. He is always right. He is always just. There's a God, and you and I are not it, and we need to hear that. The Israelites looked around and back, and it says they believed in him. They was like, this is incredible, and they feared him. All of us need to ask ourselves, what do we really believe about God? Big word. What is our theology? How do we see God? Because this story depicts a story we shouldn't cheer about in a sense, but it should open our eyes to a good view of a biblical God. And the biblical God is Old Testament and New Testament. He does not change. And so when you read this story of dead bodies floating up, it kind of should go against, it does go against, for some of us, we'll use the term liberal. Others may use the term woke biblical theology. It goes against that because what happened? Hundreds of thousands of 18-year-old, 19-year-old Egyptian soldiers who were just doing what they were told to do drowned. Hundreds of thousands. Think about it. The Jewish people, we talked about it, they celebrate Passover. What are they celebrating? They're celebrating the fact that thousands upon thousands of babies died. They're celebrating the fact, this Exodus, that thousands upon thousands of people drowned and died by the very mighty act of God. You see, that doesn't set real well with a lot of modern theology. They believed in God. They feared God. Some of us, what we need to hear right now is, there's a God and you're not it. And this God does what he wants to do. And we worship him and we believe in him. And we absolutely have a biblical fear of what it is to follow God and or reject God. Verse 22 of chapter 15, then Moses led Israel on from the sea. Now it's time to move on. And they went out to the wilderness of Shur. They journeyed for 3 days in the wilderness without finding water. They came to Marah, but they could not drink the water at Marah because it was bitter. That is why it was named Marah. The people grumbled to Moses, what are we going to drink? So he cried out to the Lord, and then the Lord showed him a tree. When he threw it into the water became drinkable. The Lord made a statute and ordinance for them in Marah, and he tested them there. He tested them there. What's he testing them? Remember I told you. God is far more interested in our consistent daily worship and living for him. He wants this consistency of living. God has led them through the sea. He's helping them see all the miraculous. Why? Because he wants to establish the nation of Israel. And they must learn to trust him. They must learn to believe in him. They must learn to fear him. They must see that he is an all-powerful, all-knowing God. And so after a few days, they're thirsty. There's no good water. They see Moses throw this tree in there. It makes it into drinkable water. But also as their journey continues, again, 1.5 million people, they've never been over here, and now they're thirsty, they're hungry, and they are complaining. They're grumbling. Why? Because they're hungry, they're thirsty. They've never been on this side before. And they're wondering, Moses, what is God doing? You ever wondered about that? What is God doing? Verse 11 of chapter 16, the Lord spoke to Moses, I have heard the complaints of the Israelites. Tell them, at twilight you will eat meat, and in the morning you will eat bread until you are full. Then you will know that I am the Lord your God. And so God's going to go. I can't read everything for you. Go through and I hope you're reading it along. God sends them quail. He sends them manna, bread from heaven. The Bible says when they wake up, it's like flakes on the grass, like dew, and they're able to eat this bread. They have this quail. They have water. They have everything that they need, and God is showing them, while he's testing them, he's showing them, I am your God, and I can meet your needs. And I'm taking you out of slavery and giving you a free new land. Think about it again. You're over here. Let's just say maybe you're single. Maybe you got your friends. Maybe with your family. You got your kids. You're on this side of the Red Sea. Think about what you have seen. Again, take a panoramic view. You saw water stand up. You waved to the fish as you walked by. When you got over here, you turned around and saw your worst enemy get drowned. You woke up and saw dead bodies on the shoreline. You became thirsty and you tasted some water and it was bitter. And God said, Moses, throw this tree in there, and it became good water. You looked around, you didn't see anything to eat. And all of a sudden, there's quails everywhere. You have some bread and you wake up and it's there. They're seeing all of this miraculous stuff happening, and yet inside of them, they're still complaining and wondering, what is God doing? And as you read through the story, you see that it's a continual, he's doing this to show them, as it just read there, that I am the Lord your God. He's doing this to test them. I am the Lord your God. What is it? You could put your faith in me. Think through what is happening. But as the great Green Bay Packers Vince Lombardi coach said, fatigue makes cowards of us all. Fatigue makes cowards of us all. And here's something that's true about us. Even if we don't get tired, we are most vulnerable when basic needs are not met, or our basic need is not met. Our basic need is met, and we're not sure about tomorrow. We're not sure about what's going to happen. And so then all of a sudden, we begin to forget. We forget what God has done. We forget what God is doing. And as we will see, the Israelite people will struggle with consistently following God's way. Why is that? Why is that? Well, the lessons we can learn is most likely it's the same reason we do. They focus on the wrong thing. They focus on the little that they have. They focus on their fear and not on their faith. And so there's constant complaining, constant grumbling, and not learning to live in the miraculous of the salvation that they have. As a matter of fact, Paul will say in 1 Corinthians, he will tell the church at Corinth, especially those who are Jewish, he says, when we look back at the Old Testament, when we look back at these stories, when we look back at the crossing of the Red Sea, we can learn from them. Go read 1 Corinthians. We can learn from them. And Paul says, listen, as followers of Christ, let's learn from our ancestors. Let's learn from what God has been doing. And that's what I want us to do today. To look and see how we can have this consistency of life. You know, we sing the song here at the church. It's called Egypt. And I don't know if you ever noticed, but the first verse of this great song that we all love says this, as words on the screen behind me. I won't forget. Why that? I won't forget, because everything that happens to them in their non-consistent life is because they keep forgetting. Paul says they forgot. So it says, I won't forget the wonder of how you brought deliverance, the exodus of my heart, because you found me, you freed me, and held back the waters for my release, O Yahweh, O God. Another verse says this, you stepped into my Egypt, and you took me by the hand, and you marched me out in freedom into the promised land, and now I will not forget you. No, I'll sing of all you've done. Today we want to talk about how can you and I look at this story, do what the Apostle Paul says, and learn from them to live a consistent, faith-filled life. Consistency in living a godly life comes from remembering. Remembering what? Paul tells the church at Corinth they did not remember what God had done. They didn't remember how faithful he was. So consistency in living a godly life comes from remembering where God met you. Where God met you. Where did God meet the nation of Israel, these Israelites? Where did he meet them? He met them in Egypt, where they had no freedom, where they were getting the snot beat out of them all the time. They worked every day, all day long. They were told what to do, where to go. They had no freedom. They were slaves. They had beatings. They had limited community. And as we learn, they began to forget about the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, because all they knew was Pharaoh and beatings and bad weeks and bad futures. Where did God meet them? He met them in their deepest sense of need, their deepest sense of no future. What about us? I want you to go back right now. Before you became a Christian, if you're a Christian, all of us have a past, right? All of us have a past. Most of us have a past that we're not really proud about, most of it, or some of it, I should say. And in our deepest need, maybe for you it was in your deepest point of sorrow, or maybe confused. Maybe you became a Christian as a teenager and there was just a sense of not having purpose. I don't know where you were when you first understood the goodness, the grace, and the salvation of God. I don't know where that is for you, but I want you to go there now. I want you to remember. I won't forget. Can you go back? Maybe it was in crazy college. Again, maybe it was at a death of a child. Maybe it was, I don't know. God knows. And if it was true and real, you know. Where were you? Remember where God met you. And while you're remembering where God met you, try to remember the emotions, the feelings. Was there a sense of helplessness? Was there a sense of abuse? Was there a sense of, I don't know. You fill in the blanks, but I'm telling you, if we're going to have a consistent Christian life, we have to remember where God met us, because that'll give us a clue into what we used to be. But also remembering, consistent living godly life comes from remembering what God has done. Many times, I do it, you do it. We read through a story like this and we're like, these people, they just walked by through the Red Sea. They saw this amazing thing, waving at fish, the whole deal. They have food and water just given to them. And yet, as the chapters go on, they continue to doubt God's love, God's grace, God's faithfulness. They complain. They are not being consistent, as Paul says, consistent in their faith. What has God done? So we look at them and we're like, you know what? If God did something like that for me, I don't know if I would ever lack in my faith. Well, go back to where you were. What has God done? What kind of freedom did he give you? You see, one of the things about remembering back is it takes us back to where we used to be. But also, as we think about what God has done, if you went from a sense of hopelessness to hope, if you went from a sense of, I don't have much of a purpose, so now I have purpose because my salvation is in Christ. I went from a sense of guilt and shame because of my sin, but now I have received grace and forgiveness, and I'm as clean and white as snow, and all that greatness, things we always talk about. There should be gratitude in our heart. And this gratitude in our heart leads to a dedicated following. You see, we read their story, we're like, how could they even do that? Too many times, I look at my story, where I came from, what God has done, and then I see my lack of focus, my lack of faith, all these anxious thoughts. And you're like, how could I if I saw that? It's the same. We got to remember. We have to remember, but not only what God has done, but what God is doing. And this is where we really need to pause. For them, the Hebrews, they're waking up in the morning. There's some bread on the grass. What? There's quail. My guess is the quail probably just dropped over dead for them. Like they probably didn't make them chase them. They got bread, they got quail. It's good water. If you read through the story, there's a battle. Their first battle after crossing. because of God's help, they waxed those people. I mean, it's just good. And they're just waking up, and yet you can read through the story, and it's not my interpretation of the story. The Apostle Paul says the same things. Like, look at what were they thinking? Don't be like that, the Apostle Paul says. What is God doing? The psalmist, in writing about the Exodus, says this in Psalm 81:10. I am the Lord your God, who brought you up from the land of Egypt. Open your mouth wide, and I will fill it. That's what I'm saying. It's all right there. And every day there's new manna, new quail, new water. It's all right there. What is God doing? Again, we look at the story like, those people are ungrateful. I mean, where is their faith? God's doing this miraculous thing. So what about us? Take a step back and look at a panoramic view of your story. Look where you are right now. Did you do that all on your own? You're that successful because you were that smart? Things are going so well because you're so awesome? Or maybe God's been doing things every day of your life, and you've been following, you've been enjoying. He's providing peace, a new path. Maybe there's opportunities. Maybe you look around and you see your family. You look at your kids, and you're like, man, God, look what you have done. Have you ever done that? What has God done? And then what is he doing? Because when we do that, then all of a sudden we have the ability to say, because this is going so well, I'll wake up tomorrow and have a good, consistent life. Now we're going to talk about in the sense of many times you wake up and the day is not good. The day is troubled. It doesn't look fun and happy and peaceful, but you can have a consistent faith because you spend every day remembering the faithfulness of God, amazed. Have you ever had any of those funny times where it's just you and God, and you just kind of chuckle to yourself? You're just amazed. What would seem pretty simple, but you know the hand of God was in it. This past summer, as you know, I speak out with our church plant in Missoula. So this summer, took Kelly and Landry with me, and we're going to mix in some vacation time. And so we drove out there. Somebody's like, man, you drove from Charlotte to the western Montana, Missoula area? You should try it sometime. It's a beautiful, beautiful country. When you fly over, you miss a lot of stuff. But we're driving through. We gave ourselves a couple days to get there. We had spent the night in Fargo, North Dakota, right? Fargo, North Dakota. If you saw the movie, a little freaky to stay there, but we stayed in Fargo, North Dakota. As we were leaving Fargo, now when you get up there on this interstate, which is 94, you can go hours without seeing anything. So as we're leaving Fargo, I glanced down the rent-a-car. It tells you how many miles you have, right? It's like you have 185 miles. It's awesome. I ain't stopping, we're going. So we're driving. Sure enough, out in the middle of nowhere, it's a beautiful day. Landry falls asleep. Kelly falls asleep, but I still got to drive. So I'm driving. I'm listening to music. I'm doing sermons, and my best sermons come when I'm driving. I'm watching this, and I'm watching that. If you've ever driven out there at a long distance by yourself, and there's no exits, it's just long, straight roads, it's awesome. You can pretty much drive as fast as you want. Just go as fast as you want. And you're just driving. So I'm just driving. And I was just driving, and all of a sudden, it just popped in my head. I should probably look down, because I haven't looked at the speedometer. I set it on a speed limit, and then I was just going. I hadn't looked down in a while. I mean, you literally could fall asleep. Just go. I hadn't looked down, so there was this notion that I should look down. I looked down, it said miles to empty, 4. And there's nothing. I see a green sign. I thought, oh, thank you. It said whatever town was coming was 7 miles from that point. I was about probably 3.5 now. So I started whispering, Lord, Lord. First of all, I don't want to hear it from my wife, but we're parked on the side of the road in nowhere, North Dakota. I said, oh, Lord. So it's 7 miles. I was all right, there's no way this computer tells you you have 4 miles, and after 4 miles, boy, there's got to be a little grace in there somewhere. I'm clicking it down, 4, 3, 2. I can see the exit coming. At this point, I haven't woke her up yet. I'm thinking, you know what? If it breaks, if we're out of gas here, I can walk that far. I can see it now because just out there, I can see it. Get to the exit. I'm going up the ramp. I'm thinking, come on. I'm at 0. I had hit 0 about a half mile before. I'm at 0. I go here. There was a stop sign. I figured, Lord does not want me to stop at that stop sign. So I made there's nobody out there. So I made a left. I go across. And as I'm going down and I see the gas station there, you hit that, and I roll into the gas station. No lie, I rolled into the gas station. Kelly, she hadn't woke up. Landry hadn't woke up. I rolled in. When she comes to second service, it'll be the first time she ever hears this story. I was like, hey, I stopped over. We got some gas. You want to get something to drink? Maybe get a donut or whatever. We're here. Da. She had no clue. I promise you, I was sweating. I was sweating. Landry didn't know. I've never told a soul till right now because you feel like an idiot. But as I was thinking through this whole idea of just living in the amazement, friends, listen, for 180 miles, I never looked down. But I'm telling you, it was the Holy Spirit, it was the Lord. There was a sense of, you need to look down, fool. I looked down, 4 miles to go. If I had blown by that exit, ain't no telling what kind of stories my wife would have the rest of her life. But more importantly, I did this before I woke her up. This is just true. I said, Lord, thank you for helping me in my stupidity. Thank you. Because if you're out in the middle of nowhere in North Dakota, sometimes you don't have a signal. It could be cray. I didn't do that the rest of the trip. I was about every 150 miles. We're getting gas now. But have you ever looked and lived through and just stopped every day and look for the hand of God? Look for the provision of God. Looking at what God is doing. If you live like that, thank you, Lord. If you live like that, then now all of a sudden we find ourselves better in faith. The Lord is watching out. As he speaks, we listen. Think about it. Why do we complain? Is complaining a lack of thankfulness? Is complaining because we feel like we're entitled? Is complaining because we're comparing? Why is it, if we're Christians, that as we see and we remember, where was I when God met me? What has he done? And what is he doing? Consistent Christian living is the understanding that God is in control and we follow after him and he is faithful and we can trust. And like I said, so that when we have those days, sometimes weeks, could be a couple months, where it seems like God is not doing anything, you'll have maturity in your faith when you don't complain, when you don't say, where is God? I told God all this stuff. You can continue to celebrate the way you did when you came out of Egypt. I promise you, when those 1.5 million were going across, they were dancing and singing and celebrating. And then a few days later, what are we going to eat? Where's the water? In those difficult times, spiritual maturity is not marked by how many Bible verses you know, how many worship songs you know. None of that marks spiritual maturity. Spiritual maturity is marked by how you act and how you react to life's settings. Why is it that we have a lack of faith? Why is it that we have a lack of trust when we can see what God is doing? Back to my example, we drove all the way out there. We got to drive all the way back. There was not one time where I looked down and saw that I was getting low on gas. These was about 100 miles. I was going to start, that I didn't laugh to myself. I couldn't laugh at anybody else. I didn't tell anybody else. I just told you fine people. That I didn't laugh to myself and think, God, that was awesome. Literally, that was awesome. That is how we are to live our consistent life. You ever thought about As you're going through your daily life, ups and downs, challenges, why we can't always have that sense of mature faith. I don't know what God's doing, but I know he's faithful. I know what he's done. Because many times it's about us. You know, a lot of people, they want to leave schools, teams, marriages, jobs, churches, whatever. And then when they get to whatever they left because there was an issue. When they get there, there's still an issue there. You know why? Here's one of the greatest phrases that I tell my kids. Wherever you go, there you are. You're in relational issues again. Maybe you're part of the problem. That job didn't work out again. Wherever you go, there you are. Same is true about living this consistency. We have to watch. We have to change and be transformed in the renewing of our mind, Paul says, from the inside out, so that we can be mature in our faith. And in that maturity, friends, then you begin to have a celebration, which then leads us to the last aspect of consistency in living a godly life comes from remembering to worship God. And then I just threw this one on there, and not wine. To worship and not wine. Paul says about the Israelites, you can read the story. They had moments of worship, but there was this moments of whining. Again, consistency in our dedication to Jesus as worshiping for what he has done, what he is doing, and what he will do. What he's done, what he's doing, and then you have faith of what he will do. Here in our part of the United States, we have family and friends, our next door mountain neighbors. How horrific is that? And I would tell you this without going into too deep. In the days right after, where the government wasn't involved, when there were some challenges, you know who was up there? The churches. Giving people places to sleep and water and food, paying for churches like us down here, giving money to. Remember, when you give the year-end gift, you give so we have a stockpile for Go Missions so that we could do all the things we just did with moments' notice. That's why we do it. Churches were doing it. And it was an amazing thing up there. And I've already started hearing the pastors from up there saying, this is horrific, dead bodies everywhere. But what is happening is people are seeing you put your faith in God, because it's the churches and the Christians many times up there who are coming. And so they're living through this horrific thing. But if they're Christians, even in the darkest, miserable time, they should be able to look back at what God has done, what he is doing, and what he will do. We will make it. We will get through. Why? Because God is all-powerful. God controls it all. Listen, dependence on God is not weakness. It's a lifestyle of worship. Your dependence on God is not a weakness. I've heard non-Christian people say that before. Oh, you Christians are just weak. Our dependence on God is not weakness. It's a lifestyle of worship, meaning I depend on God because I know where he met me. Oh, man, it's incredible. I know what he did, and I know what it was to experience his love and his grace. I see what he's doing, and so, of course, I will worship through it. There's a song that says that. I will worship through this challenge, and or just the good times in life, and there's a lifestyle of worship. Again, this is spiritual maturity. This is what we understand about the fruits of the Spirit, the fruit of the Spirit, I should say. Galatians chapter 5, the fruit of the Spirit is described as love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, and self-control, which means, as a Christian, when I am having a lifestyle of worship, and remember, worship is not music. Worship can be music, but worship is a lifestyle of putting your faith and trust in God. And I will tell you this, People who live a consistent Christian life are those, Paul would say, that have a consistent daily transformation of life and worship on a regular basis is not a weakness. It is the ability to say, God, you are in control. And when I look back at what you have done, and sometimes it's far, far back, sometimes it's yesterday, and what you are doing, it causes me to want to worship today, to want to worship tomorrow. And again, so now we're talking about this is a picture of mature Christian faith. Today I've used the word consistency. Our Christian faith should not look like the emotions of a middle school girl or boy. Ooh, 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 all over the place. Consistent in faith. Exodus chapter 15, I'm going to go back. After they cross the Red Sea, Moses pens this worship song. I want you to listen to the words as we prepare our hearts to begin to worship, because God has taken us out of our personal Egypt. Then Moses and the Israelites sang this song to the Lord. They said, I will sing to the Lord, for he is highly exalted. He has thrown the horse and its rider into the sea. The Lord is my strength and my song. He has become my salvation. This is my God, and I will praise him, my father's God, and I will exalt him. The Lord is a warrior. The Lord is his name. He threw Pharaoh's chariots into the army, into the sea, and the elite of his officers were drowned in the Red Sea. Isn't that crazy? This is a worship song. The floods covered them. They sang to the depths like a stone. Lord, your right hand is glorious in power. Lord, your right hand shattered the enemy. You overthrew your adversaries by your great majesty. You unleashed your burning wrath. It consumed them like stubble. The water heaped up at the blast from your nostrils. The current stood like a dam. The watery depths congealed in the heart of the sea. The enemy said, I will pursue, I will overtake, I will divide the spoil. My desire will be gratified at their expense. I will draw my sword, my hand will destroy them. But you blew with your breath, and the sea covered them. They sank like lead in the mighty waters. Lord, who is like you among the gods? Who is like you, glorious in holiness, revered with praises, performing wonders? It actually goes on a little longer, but I want to just pause right there. This, friends, is why Moses, we will see in the next day or the next week, Sundays, this is why Moses is going to get frustrated with the people. He's like, did you just see what happened? Let's worship and celebrate. So right out of the Red Sea, they are worshiping. If you go back to the story, I didn't want to tell you that till now. They're worshiping. This is incredible. And in the next chapter, where's our food? Where's God doing? You should have left us in Egypt. Friends, our ability to worship on a daily basis helps us to live an excited, free life. I'm going to ask you to close your eyes as our band comes out. Are you living an exciting, free life? Right now, remember in your mind what it was like before. And as we celebrate and sing this song, you took me out of my Egypt. What is your Egypt? I will not forget what you have done. And by us recounting what God has done, powerful, we are able to live a consistent, mature Christian life, because what God has done, is doing, is what he will do. And we must put our faith and focus on him. God, thank you that in this moment we can we can celebrate like Moses and the nation of Israel of what you have done. And many of us can bring to our minds the details of how you rescued us. Many of us can bring to our minds the details of how you spoke to us when our life only had 4 more miles of gas. And yet, God, you showed us the way. You brought it to our attention. We followed after you, and you have been proven faithful. God, you're proven faithful because you are faithful. We can do no other than to live a life of worship in consistency. And in this moment, we can do no other than to worship through singing as we celebrate what you have done. We ask it in your name.